So section 2 of chapter 4 is going to be what shapes an ecosystem. So these are going to be the things that make ecosystems different from one another and how we're really going to identify them. So biotic factors are biological influences on organisms within an ecosystem. So biotic factors are living, right? Biological living factors, whereas abiotic factors are the non-living or physical factors. So we have biotic, which is living, abiotic, which is not living. So biotic things would be like the trees that live in an area, the animals that live in an area, whereas abiotic factors would be things like the amount of rainfall, the pH of the soil, right, the temperature. Those are non-living. So together, the biotic and abiotic factors determine the survival and growth of organisms and productivity of the ecosystem in which an organism lives. So the habitat is the area where an organism lives, where it lives. Is it in the trees? Does it live in the ground? Does it live in what particular place? The niche is the full range of physical and biological conditions in which an organism lives and the way in which an organism uses those conditions. So it's its role in the environment. So niche is really the role of the environment. And community interactions such as competition, predation, and various forms of symbiosis can powerfully affect an ecosystem. So take a look right here. These three different types of warblers are all going to live in the same tree, but they're not going to occupy the same niche, right? Notice how the one uses the bottom, the other one in the middle, and one at the top. So by having them occupy three different niches, they have three different roles in this habitat, this tree, and so they're not competing with each other. So a resource is any necessity of life: light, food, space. So plants are going to compete for light, right? Animals for food, trees and animals for space. They're going to compete. Now, the competitive exclusion principle states that no two species can occupy the same niche in the same habitat at the same time. So if we were to break it down and use the example of my classroom, no two students can occupy the same desk. All right, the desk would be the habitat. They have the same role, student, at the same time. You have different times. Okay, so that's what allows you guys to not compete with each other for chairs. Okay. Predation is an interaction where one organism captures and feeds on another organism. Symbiosis is any relationship in which two species live closely together. And mutualism is when both species benefit from the relationship. So we talked about this in the last chapter, okay, but we're just reviewing it because how it applies to community interactions. Commensalism is where one member benefits and the other is neither helped nor harmed. And parasitism is when one organism lives on or inside another and harms it. So again, we talked about all these last chapter. They should be familiar. We're just reviewing them. Now, ecosystems are constantly changing in response to natural and human disturbances. As an ecosystem changes, older inhabitants gradually die out and new organisms move in, causing further change to the community. Ecological succession is the series of predictable changes that occurs in a community over time. So let's take a look at ecological succession right here. This is an example of succession. Notice how we have bare rock. Then in picture 2, we have some mosses or lichens growing. Then in picture 3, we have some grasses. And then in 4, trees and shrubs. So it's a progressive change over time. So primary succession is succession that occurs on the surface when no soil exists. So if you have bare rock and no soil, it's primary succession. So if a volcano erupts, then you have that rock layer over it. Now, secondary succession is what occurs when there's a disturbance that changes the existing community, but the soil remains. So if there's like a forest fire, that's going to wipe out all of the trees and all of the plants, but you're still going to have that soil there. Okay? So primary, no soil. Secondary, soil. After you get to a certain point, after primary succession reaches the grass stage of succession, you're really going to be the same throughout. So marine succession, just to give you an idea here, this is an example from the textbook, not necessarily going to be on your test. A whale will die and attract scavengers and decomposers. Within a year, the tissue is gone, and the carcass supports a small number of fish, and the decomp enriches the surrounding sediments. And when only the skeleton remains, a third community of heterotrophic bacteria decompose the oil in the whale bones and release chemicals that chemosynthetic autotrophs will use to feed on. And here's a diagram of marine succession occurring. Okay, so it's a change how the ecosystem is held up and helped by the death of a whale.